Hi, and welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you here this week for our one on one conversations. If this is a new episode that you're listening to, what I like to do is sit in and have about once a month a conversation where I can share some of my thoughts with you around being a grandfather and around grandparenting. So if you're new to either the YouTube channel or to the podcast, welcome on in. And I hope you get something out of this conversation today. Now, before we get started, I want to remind you that in just over a month, Grandparents Academy is hosting Grandparents Week. I've got a link for that into the show notes, and you can use that link to sign up for your free admission to Grandparents Week. This is an awesome opportunity for you to gather with other grandparents, learn about topics that are important to us that really help to strengthen our relationships with our adult children as well as our grandchildren. Again, this is a free event that's being put on by Grandparents Academy, so be sure to check out the show notes and use the link so that you can secure your free admission to this awesome program. Now, I want to get in this week and talk to you a little bit about the experience that I had with going back to my old scout camp that I worked at back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So a long time ago. And it was fantastic to go back to Southwest Virginia and meet with some of these people that are now Gen Z or iGen, as they're sometimes referred to, and really get to see these young people work hard to deliver quality program to many of the young people coming to the Scout reservation and the Scout camp in particular, to have a great outdoor experience, to grow personally, to grow with their skills, their confidence, all these sorts of things that I really believe in and that I've spent pretty much my whole life trying to be a part of, as well as trying to lead other people towards these goals as well. So I want to start out with some observations about Gen Z, or like I said, the iGen generation. Now, it's referred to in some circles as the iGen generation because these are the generations that grew up from the time that they were little babies that had devices in their hands. Now, I know some of us with millennial kids and some of us that are Gen Xers, we've been around devices quite a bit, but these kids, these Gen Zs, have really come into being born and then being given smartphones at restaurants or iPads or whatever. So that's why they're sometimes referred to as the iGen generation. Now, the iGen generation or Generation Z, depending on who you're looking at for the definition of that generation, they were born between 1995 and 2010, or even 1996 and 2015. So a lot of these kids, for the most part, grew up and around the 9/11 incident that we had, which is a big cornerstone for a lot of baby boomers, Gen Xers, that, a lot of people refer to that as kind of our generation's Pearl Harbor event. So that's what I'm using as kind of a placeholder for talking around some of these children, young adults, excuse me, that were born before and then after that event. Now, some of these generations are very adept at multitasking, which also means that they don't give a lot of 100% focus to different tasks. And this is just a byproduct of both what we've looked for culturally, as well as with different devices, different things going on, being able to kind of give minimal attention to a lot of different things. So that's not really a great thing. It certainly was when we were coming up. Remember those old business movies and things back in the late 80s and 90s where everybody was talking about they were awesome multitaskers. Well, I think the research is coming in that multitasking is not necessarily a great thing, that you're really not giving something your overall focus of attention. And so, it's just something that Gen Z has come up with, and they're better at it. So maybe they're better at shifting the percentage of focus based on multiple different activities rather than what Gen Z and the baby boomers and the millennials are in that regard. So the other thing that these iGen or Gen Zs, they tend to be more entrepreneurial. They're young enough to take risks, right? So they're not necessarily already focused in on families and growing young families. There's a lot of the ability to take risks. And I think a lot of generations have been like that, right? Where unless you were really hammered in that, hey, as soon as you're out of high school, you want to go find a factory job, you want to go work in the mill, get your 30 years and get your retirement. I think a lot of us that are in our late teens and our early 20s before we start taking on responsibility of family are more apt to take some risks when it comes to business or interests. So right now, Gen Z is definitely in that area and are popping up as more entrepreneurial than maybe some of us older folks are, that have mortgages, that have families, that have different commitments where if the risk doesn't pay off, then we've got more consequences going on. Gen Z tends to want to work. They want to be in and active. They want to be doing something worthwhile, which is great. I think sometimes Gen Z and even millennials get a bad rep as far as being lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to be part of an organization. They want to do kind of a minimum effort for maximum gain. And that's not really showing up in what the research says about Gen Z. This is funny to me. Gen Z thinks millennials are old. So, I've got a great book that I grabbed from my father that was a bunch of cartoons back in the 60s around hippies. And I definitely remember people in those cartoons walking around with T-shirts and buttons and things. Don't trust anybody over 30. Well, millennials are getting there, and Gen Z is thinking that millennials are old, and they've got some obstacles to overcome in that regard. So I think that's hilarious. As much as we hear this thing about millennials yelling at baby boomers and even Gen Xers about being old and stuck in their ways and things, Gen Z is thinking that millennials are in that camp as well. Gen Z's self-worth is definitely affected by social media. In fact, according to Generational Kinetics, 42% of Gen Z feel that social media has a direct impact on how they feel about themselves. So from a very early age, when we were at restaurants and we wanted to keep kids quiet and we started handing them phones and they started getting on social media and they started watching YouTube videos. And I'm not meaning to bash YouTube or anybody else. This is just something that I think has happened. A lot of Gen Z grew up seeing how social media has been used to show sometimes only the good side of things or the very negative side of things, right? So I go to my generation, Gen X. A lot of us are on Facebook, and a lot of us tend to only post when we're having highlight type of events. And recently for me, I took my grandson and my wife, and we went out and we did a kayaking trip, and it was the first trip for my grandson. So yeah, we were on Facebook going, oh, we're having an awesome time. We're doing this. This is great. And so people only are seeing that part of it. That week, there were some struggles going on just personally and things that I didn't share. So I think sometimes we see people and social media being the highs and the very lows and not sometimes in the middle. And I think if you're a person that grew up on social media, such as Gen Z, yeah, however that media is shown to you, whether it's videos or podcasts or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, I think sometimes if you're feeling like life isn't going well for you, but you're seeing all these people living their quote best life ever, I think that can definitely play into adding even more into this idea of, um, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my life. There's something wrong going on here. And so I think we see definitely that 42% having probably a negative impact on how they're feeling about themselves. I doubt we're seeing 42% of Gen Z feels that social media makes them feel really great about themselves. So, just a couple of observations around Gen Z or the iGen generation, if you're not aware. And again, to give you the date range, it's anywhere from 1995 to maybe 2015. And again, these things all depend on who's defining them, right? So, I spent a week out in the woods. I was working with these young people. I was eating with them. I was smelling them for sure because it was hot and sweaty and nasty in Southwest Virginia in July. And, again, these kids are absolutely fantastic. Love them. A couple of the things here is that I feel like I had a pretty wide demo group here. I had people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, not every single one. So the sample size that I had would not be probably statistically significant, but it was significant as far as a snapshot. And with me being, for lack of a better word, embedded into Gen Z for this particular experience. So these kids that I was working with, and yeah, I'm old, so anybody pretty much under 30 is a kid. Um, 15 to 25, 27, 28, so not quite 30. So they definitely fit into that age group of that Gen Z. Um, One of the things that really stood out to me is that few of the kids that I saw were really, I would call them self-starters. Definitely great followers and great people that would execute. And it's something that I think is different from what I saw from my memories, which may be faulty from working with Gen Xers, let's say, and even some millennials in my experience. And what I mean by that is that a lot of these kids would do awesome, awesome work, but you had to tell them what to do. And there's definitely some of this where you might have first year staff that don't necessarily know what to do and need some guidance and some direction. But I feel like there were some things that were going on that were simple. Like I would say I would jump in and have done an activity, taken on a task, done something like that, um, and not waited for somebody else. And I think some of the self-starting challenge is a little bit of not feeling like they're responsible for their immediate surroundings, not responsible for the outcomes of their areas. And some of that can be with just the way that we parented. Frankly, I think some of us in Gen X and even the tail end of the baby boomers, I think we did so much for our kids. And I'm painting with a broad brush here. So, your situation may differ, but I think we did so much for them that as our kids started having kids and we started seeing millennials and Gen Z, there was a lot of, ooh, should I do this or not do this? I'm going to wait until somebody tells me what to do versus I think a difference I would say between Gen X and baby boomers, a lot of us after a certain amount of time figured out that, hey, the grass is long. I need to go cut the grass before dad yells at me to go cut the grass. or doing some kind of an activity around the house before we're getting told to. And, you know, I think too is that we can definitely say that there's personality traits, there's some things here. So that's an observation. Not a lot of people that were, let's say, taking initiative to get things done in their sphere of influence or the areas that they were responsible for. Another observation that I had were that these kids on the whole seem to be very risk adverse. One of the funny incidents that we had at this camp was somebody dug up some old video footage of scouts back in the 80s at this camp. And some of the new staff members, and these were probably staff members that were 20 and under, were watching these videos of essentially Gen Xers out on these really thin planked rope swings, running around with aluminum canoes, aluminum rowboats, and we had these old school orange horseshoe collar PFDs, or personal flotation devices, that might have had a tie at the top of the vest and maybe a clip-on on there, and all sorts of different activities, water carnivals, belly flop contests, all sorts of things in this video. And what struck me on this was not just one, but a few people were talking about how risky those activities were. And oh my gosh, I can't believe they were doing this. And oh my gosh, look at the equipment they had, and look at this, and look at that. And, almost like they were, couldn't believe that people could go out and have fun and assume a level of risk. And part of doing those rope swings, and I was telling them, was that because they would ask, like, well, what happens if you couldn't do the rope swing? I was like, you just didn't do it. If you didn't feel like you had the upper body strength to hold on to that rope long enough to swing out into the lake and drop into the water, and then had the ability to swim back, yeah, you didn't do it. And if you did try it and you had something that went wrong and you bounced off the bank, you kind of just took your licks. It was a bad day, that sucked, but you moved on. And some of these young people just couldn't understand it. They're caught between, boy, that looks like fun, and boy, that's so risky. I can't believe anybody let you ever do that. And that seemed just really weird and strange to me. Was that risk adverse mentality, I would say. And I don't blame the kids for this. So let me, make sure that I let you know, these observations aren't necessarily things that I want to blame Gen Z for. I think they're things that we've done in parenting and grandparenting and just socially that have conditioned this generation that I'm talking about in this way. So they're all, just like we're products of our culture and our generations, they're products of their culture and their generation. So the next item too, and this kind of falls back into that self-starter, was I wasn't seeing a lot of creativity when it came to problem solving. I had a few instances where people in different program areas, and the program areas would be places where they're teaching scoutcraft, or they're teaching handicraft, or ecology, or aquatics, or field sports, or different areas. And there might need to be some minor maintenance type activities done. Nothing huge, but the kids in that area were not taking this on, like, how do we solve this problem, and how do we do this? And they weren't being very creative around that. It was like, hey, I've got this problem. I need to call somebody else to come in and fix it. I can't fix it with the tools that I have at hand. When I'm looking at it as somebody that's like, yeah, you're 100% you can. Here's what we need to do. It's not going to be a permanent fix, but this is definitely going to keep you up and running and keep program going and things moving on. So those were a couple of my observations. And remember, I'm painting with kind of a broad brush here, but I want to also focus in on what can we do as grandparents about some of this, because these aren't necessarily positive traits for a generation or even for our individual grandkids. If you see grandkids with some of these kind of attributes going on, um, I think it hurts them down the road when it comes time to, live in an apartment on their own or have a car or do some different things. Some of these, challenges that I'm pointing out are not necessarily things that are going to help them resolve challenges in the future. So I don't want to just be the old guy screaming at clouds and talking about how great it was to be a Gen Xer. I want to talk about now, what can we do as grandparents? So I don't have teenage grandkids, but these are some things that I'm going to keep an eye on to see what I can do to help them maybe not be so dependent on others, maybe being able to be a little bit more of a self-starter. So the first thing that I think grandparents can do is, if you see something, do something. And what I mean by that is, when we have grandkids that are visiting with us or we're visiting with their families, help those kids start to take action when they see an issue that's going on at the house. If they have an issue with their car, if they have something going on in their bedroom, if they want to do something or have a different outcome, we can help coach them up and teach them that it's okay to be actually proactive and to take action in regards to changing their environment, to addressing something that maybe is broken. And some of this could be just as simple as, hey, when you're visiting, you notice the kitchen floor is dirty. So maybe it's like, hey, Billy, the kitchen floor is dirty. I bet your mom would really love it if you could take the broom and kind of just do a quick sweep of the kitchen floor. Hey, I noticed that we've got a small leak here, or we've got something going on. Hey, Jennifer, why don't you come over and help me fix this, right? So one, we're starting to teach them, like, when they see something that's wrong or they see an opportunity to help out around the house, that they can go ahead and not wait for somebody to tell them what to do, but they can go ahead and address the problem. And certainly there's going to be some things where it's out of their control, it's out of their skill set. They can't. But I think if we can help them look for opportunities to be a little bit more proactive around the house, also coach up the adult kids to let them know that, hey, maybe you need to back off a little bit and put this task on somebody, on one of the grown grandchildren's plate. Maybe taking out the trash when you've got a 15-year-old grandson. Maybe that's not really something mom needs to do anymore. Maybe that's something the son or the daughter can start to pick up and do. The other observation that I had that grandparents can help kids out with, and this may be more of a grandpa thing versus a grandma thing, is encouraging grandkids to take some calculated risk, to engage in some risky behavior, to push themselves out of their comfort zones. Now, I'm not talking about free climbing the Empire State Building and doing a base jump off of that. That's not the kind of stuff I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is that if you've got like a local river or a creek close by or something, and it's deep enough to jump off a 10-foot bridge into some water with, maybe that's kind of a fun activity to do and to take a little bit of a risk. Now, again, grandpas, I'm definitely making, if you use my bridge jumping example, you're making sure that the area is free of hazards. You've already checked it out. It's deep enough. It's all those kinds of things, but it can help start to get kids to be able to measure risk appropriately, that it's not a zero and or 100. It's that there's some risk and there's some things that you can take that you need to think about, but you can have a lot of fun and you can do some things by pushing your level of comfort, as well as being able to really identify that level of risk. And I know I'm going to get some feedback on this. So, if you got some ideas, if I'm off base with this encouraging some calculated risky behavior, be sure to send me an email, drop me a comment wherever you're listening to this or viewing this. The next part that I want to talk about is for us to help them be more forward focused, right? And this is something, it's natural for teenagers. Everything's immediate. Everything's right now. Everything is something that we have to do. I'm feeling everything very intensely. That's part of being a teenager. That's just part of how that is. But I think as grandparents, we can start to help and have those discussions about the kids being forward focused. And what I mean by that is when they're 14 or 15, start talking to them. Hey, when you get your driver's license, when you turn 16, where is it that you want to go? What do you want to do? How do you want to do this? When you're 16, what's your ideal summer job? What do you think you want to be doing that you're interested in? And then carry it on to 17, at 18. Hey, at 18, boy, you're going to be getting ready to graduate high school, probably, right? And you might be looking to, are you thinking about joining the military? Are you thinking about doing this? Are you going to go up and work the oil sands up in Alberta, Canada? Whatever that might be. I think having those discussions and bringing up that forward focus starts to put a little bit of a framework and some goals and some expectations even into the mind of our younger grandchildren and our teenage grandchildren. And then the last thing I would say is, help them identify that you might have some constraints in problem solving, but that doesn't mean that you can't solve the problem. And what I mean by that is that maybe you don't have the best piece of wood to make a repair with, but you have a piece of wood that could be a temporary fix. So maybe looking at those constraints and maybe getting creative on the problem solving is something that we can do together with the grandchildren. Hey, maybe we don't have the money for this, or maybe our grandchildren don't have the money for this. So how do we get creative within the constraints that we have to develop a problem solving strategy that we can then execute, that we can take ownership of, that we can point back to and say, hey, I did that. I fixed that. I took charge of it. And, I think there's something in that whole creative problem solving that we are losing to an extent as we've seen fewer and fewer family farms and even grandkids having the experience of being on a family farm that we lost. I mean, I've talked about my grandfather and his farm, and I've talked to so many different, adult grandchildren about their grandfather's farms or what their grandmothers were doing on farms, and a lot of that stuff was you had to fix the equipment yourself. You couldn't just afford to take everything into town to get it fixed. There's a lot to be said for a little bit of duct tape, some twine, and some elbow grease, and maybe a couple of screws. Sometimes that works out, but I'm not seeing that same kind of creativity when it comes to problem solving with Gen Z as maybe I can look back and notice with even millennials or baby boomers for sure, and Gen Xers. And these observations are not meant for me to be sounding like I'm poo-pooing the old Gen Z and that the world's going to end and, oh my gosh, the future's bleak. I don't believe that at all. I think the future looks bright, but I look to see that, hey, as grandparents, we can do things to help our grandkids out a little bit more. So, one of the things I want to really wrap up with is that as grandparents, we can only do what we can do. At the end of the day, these Gen Z kids, if they're not ours, really belong to the parents. And we can only have so much influence on what becomes of them, how they develop, what their experiences are, what our influence is. So even when you see behaviors, when you see things within our grandchildren that we may not necessarily like, they're that's not our job to necessarily go in and correct that. Excuse me, I'm having trouble talking today. Our job is to go in and love them and to coach them up the best we can, and you can only do what you can do. So, take that mindset with you when you have these interactions, that you're not going to turn around somebody's behavior when you only have a week or two a year with them, or you have dinner with them once a month or whatever. But I think if you're focused on what you can do to coach them up, to help them get a leg up in the world, that's going to go a long way. And that's going to be something that's going to be remembered. And so I want to end this again saying that I think the future is bright. I think we get caught up in the social media aspect that I was talking about, where things are either really great or really in despair, and I can't wait for a meteor to take everybody out. And that's not where it's going to be, but we can help make things a little bit better by having this loving heart, by being more of a coach than a dictator to these grandkids of ours, and that we can just be as positive as we can about their future. Of course, we're going to talk about how great it was to ride in the back of pickup trucks, and how great it was that, we had bench seats, and how great it was that we did all these different things and activities, and that we jumped our bikes off of curbs, and we did all these different things. But the thing is that generations change, world changes, and we can want to remember the best of what we grew up in. But we got to also understand that the best that we had growing up is not necessarily the best of what these kids have in front of them. So I know I've talked a lot. I want to remind you again, Grandparents Week is coming up. This is hosted by Grandparents Academy. And do yourself a favor. If you haven't already signed up, grab your free admission for this. Check out the links in the show notes below. And let's work on getting as many grandparents into Grandparents Week as we possibly can. So until next time, remember to stay cool.